Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up a real time capsule, a book that pretty much created a genre. Norman Vincent Peale's 1952 mega bestseller, The Power of Positive Thinking.
It's just a foundational text. I mean,
Hmm.
15 million copies sold. It didn't just sell, it shaped an entire movement.
Right.
And Peele's goal, he was very clear, it wasn't to write some uh, dusty theological text. He said he spent years documenting a simple, workable philosophy of living.
He called them spiritual formulas, which is such a fascinating way to put it.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
The whole promise was a practical guide to a, quote, happy, satisfying, and worthwhile life.
And what's amazing is how he immediately zeroes in on what people needed then, and what they still need today. He framed this as a personal improvement manual,
A direct action manual, yeah. And his target audience was anyone suffering from a lack of self-confidence.
which he saw as this pervasive, crippling problem.
Oh, completely. He cites this university survey, and this is in the early 50s, mind you,
Yeah.
that found 75% of students said a lack of confidence was their #1 personal problem.
75%. That's staggering.
It is. 3 out of 4 people. So Peele's whole argument starts there. He's saying, look, you're not failing because of your circumstances. You're failing because of what you believe about yourself.
Okay, so let's unpack that. That takes us right into part one. Where does that lack of belief come from? Where do these feelings of inadequacy start?
Well, according to Peele, the roots are almost always in childhood.
That makes sense.
He describes them as these learned responses. You know, the classic example he gives is the kid who gets C's and is constantly compared to the sibling who gets all A's.
Right. That kid starts to build an internal script that just says, I'm the one who fails.
Exactly. And he also talks about emotional violence or just these constant negative comments.
He even uses himself as an example, which I found really powerful. He talks about his own struggle with being called skinny.
Yeah, that was surprisingly vulnerable. It wasn't just a nickname. He internalized it so deeply, he spent decades trying to gain weight. It became a whole complex for him.
And it was tied up with the pressure of being a preacher's son, right? This expectation to be, as he put it, nice and namby-pamby.
So that insecurity stopped him from being decisive. And his big breakthrough, his formula for overcoming all that was, well, it was twofold. First, develop a tremendous faith in God.
Which then provides the foundation for, quote, a humble yet soundly realistic faith in yourself.
And the mechanics for that. It wasn't just wishful thinking. It was intense prayer and reading the Bible. He saw it as a kind of cognitive technique.
This is his whole applied Christianity concept in action, isn't it?
Perfectly. He takes this abstract spiritual idea and turns it into a daily, almost a psychological reprogramming tool. The story he tells about the traveling salesman is just a brilliant illustration of
Oh, well,
this.
salesman, yes. He was just drowning in insecurity, terrible sales numbers.
Right. So his wonderful plan, as Steele calls it, was all about conditioning his mind. He's in his car all day.
So he just surrounds himself with positivity.
Literally. He taped these little cards with Bible verses onto his car's dashboard. Things like, if you have faith, nothing shall be impossible unto you.
So with every mile he drove, he was just flooding his subconscious with these vital thoughts of courage and confidence.
I mean, you think about it, that's basically a form of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, just decades before anyone called it that. He's hacking his own brain.
And this all points to one of the most famous quotes in the book from Dr. Carl Menninger, which is that attitudes are more important than facts.
That phrase is the absolute heart of the entire book. And it's not about denying reality. It's about saying that your attitude towards reality is what determines whether you overcome it.
Which we see in that story about the businessman who lost everything.
Exactly. He was completely trapped by the facts of his failure. He felt like his life was over.
Hopeless.
And Peele didn't say, oh, the failure didn't happen. He just challenged the man's attitude. He made him list his remaining assets.
And the list wasn't about money, was it?
Not at all. It was. A wonderful wife, 3 devoted children, his integrity, his health, his faith. He suddenly realized he still had these 7 core assets. The facts of his financial loss hadn't changed, but his perspective on them had. And that's where the power to rebuild came from.
So if our inner world, our attitude, is the real battleground, how do we keep it energized? That brings us to part 2, his techniques for inner power. He makes a really interesting claim about what truly drains us.
Yeah, he's very direct about this. It is not hard work that makes you tired.
So what is it?
Emotional upheaval. Things like fear, resentment, internal conflicts. Those are the real energy leaks. A peaceful mind, he argues, is what actually generates power.
And he gives a very specific technique for this, the habit of silence.
He insists on it. He says everyone needs at least 15 minutes of absolute quiet every single day.
It sounds a lot like mindfulness or meditation.
It's his version of it, for sure. But it's not about active thinking. It's about throwing your mind into neutral, letting it become still so you can hear, the deeper sounds of harmony. He saw it as the antidote to the frantic pace of modern life.
Speaking of inner turmoil, he also tackles guilt head-on. He talks about a self-punishment mechanism.
Right. Where people just refuse to forgive themselves for past mistakes. They get locked in this cycle of apprehension. They overwork themselves.
Which can lead to nervous breakdowns.
It's a prison you build for yourself. And his solution is an act of surrender. You have to yield that guilt to what he calls the healing therapy of Christ. You have to consciously choose to let it go, to stop that feedback loop.
That word choose seems really important here, especially when he talks about happiness.
Oh, absolutely. He quotes Abraham Lincoln. Most folks are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. For Peale, happiness isn't an accident. It's a choice and a skill.
And he contrasts that with the person who, as he puts it, manufactures her own unhappiness.
Right, the story of the lawyer's wife. Even on a pleasure trip, she's complaining about everything. The drafty room, the service, the food. She is actively and skillfully making herself miserable.
We've all met that person.
We have. And to fight that tendency to stew around about inconsequential things, Peale says you need to find God's rhythm.
Which sounds like his version of finding a purpose.
Exactly. It's the 1952 anti-hustle philosophy. Slow down, align yourself with something bigger than you are. That dedication to a greater purpose is what generates that boundless energy everyone is looking for.
That idea of conviction is a perfect transition to part 3, which is about applied spiritual principles. If faith is the engine, prayer is the fuel. He describes prayer as a scientific technique.
This is where he gets really explicit about it. He talks about scientific procedures for the release of spiritual energy. He's framing prayer not just as a conversation, but as manifestation of energy, a power source you can tap into.
And he gives a very clear 3-step formula for it. Prayerize, picturize, actualize.
Right. So prayerize is just the simple direct talk with God. Lord, what should I do here?
Then picturize, which is maybe the most famous or controversial part, holding a clear mental image of what you want to happen.
This is where it starts to sound a lot like modern manifestation, isn't it? The story of the woman whose husband had left. It's really striking.
She didn't beg him to come back. She just sat at home night after night, visualizing him sitting in his old chair.
Until he came back.
Yeah.
And the final step, actualize, is the belief that if you hold that mental picture with enough faith, it will become reality.
It's all about the power of expectation. What the mind expects, it receives.
Which leads right to that fantastic baseball story. Josh O'Reilly's San Antonio team, they were in a terrible slump.
They weren't bad players, though. They were just mentally defeated. They were expecting to lose.
And the fix, supposedly, was that a preacher came and blessed their bats. But Peale is very clear. The wood in the bats didn't change.
Their minds changed.
Exactly. They started to believe again. They started expecting the best. And their success came roaring back. The power wasn't in the bats. It was in their heads.
This idea of total commitment is summed up so well by that trapeze instructor's advice.
Oh, it's a perfect metaphor. Throw your heart over the bar, and your body will follow.
You can't be a holdout, as he says. You can't keep a little bit in reserve, just in case.
You have to go all in. Mentally, spiritually, you commit fully.
Which is easy to say, but hard to do when you're facing real obstacles. So that brings us to our last section, part 4, overcoming defeat. He's using a great golf analogy here about the mental rough.
I love this one. A pro golfer taught him that the rough near the green, it's only mental. The idea of the obstacle is often way worse than the obstacle itself.
So your attitude toward the problem is the most important factor in beating it.
It's the whole ball game. And if the obstacle is mental, then the biggest mental illness we face is worry. He calls it a bad mental habit.
And one that has real physical consequences.
Absolutely. This is way ahead of its time. He's citing a doctor who says, we fear not only in our minds, but in our hearts, brains, and viscera. He saw the psychosomatic link pointing to the huge rise in sleeping pills and aspirin. He called it the aspirin age.
So what's his fix for the worry habit? He has this 2-step mental hygiene technique.
It's so practical. First, you empty your mind every day, ideally before bed. You literally visualize your fears and anxieties draining away, like water from a basin.
You clear out the negative programming.
And then, Step 2, you immediately refill it. You fill that empty space with thoughts of faith, courage, and peace. He says faith is the one power that fear simply cannot stand against.
This ties right into his ideas about healing, too. He points out that even mainstream medicine was starting to recognize that a huge portion of illnesses were rooted in emotional
Right,
problems.
about a third of all hospital cases, he says. It just reinforces his core point that your inner peace is crucial for your physical health.
Okay, but what about the most destructive emotion, the biggest energy leak of all? Anger and resentment.
Ah, yes. And his suggestions for that are, they're incredibly physical.
Almost comically so.
They are. To cool down your anger, he says, you have to physically relax, unclench your fists, speak in a whisper. And his best tip, try to lie down because, quote, it is very difficult to get mad lying down. You're basically forcing your body out of its fight or flight response,
And the spiritual side of that is grievance drainage.
which is to sincerely pray for the person who hurt you. Not just going through the motions, but truly praying for them until that feeling of resentment is just gone.
It's not for them, it's for you. You stop letting their negativity live inside your head.
Exactly. You stop being the reservoir for it.
So really, this entire deep dive keeps coming back to one central idea from the book. An inflow of new thoughts can remake you. To change your life, you have to start by changing your mind.
That's the whole philosophy.
Yeah.
You visualize, you prayerize, and then you actualize. But the crucial part, and he says this over and over, is persistent practice. These techniques only work when worked. It requires real discipline.
So as you're thinking about all this, let's go back to that golf analogy, the idea of the mental rough. If what you believe determines what you achieve, and the obstacles in your way are often just mental, what specific expectation, good or bad, have you been creating for yourself today? What percentage of the rough in your own life is actually being defined and maybe even maintained by your own beliefs instead of by reality? Maybe today's the day to start emptying that basin and refilling it with something better.